So, thank you all. We are reconvening for the second part of the morning presentations. And with Pieter presenting us the new way to do XSL and XQuery in the web, right? Can you try that? Maybe it's too.
Let's try again. Am I alive? Yes, I am alive and kicking. Okay, hi everybody. We had, I think, 2 difficult talks this morning, but now you can relax because XSLWeb is meant to be very easy. So even though I'm stupid, I feel confident. I am Pieter Masereeuw. I like XSLWeb. I like it so much that I give this talk. But I'm not XSLWeb's creator. I'm just a user, or you might call me an evangelist. The creator is Maarten Kroon. Is this working? I believe the sound is going. Maybe I should stand here. Maarten Kroon is the creator, and I'm the evangelist. Well, maybe you know some other evangelists back in the past. They had also a creator, but you never saw him. In this time, the creator is in the room. And if you, at the end, have difficult questions that I can't answer, he'll be glad to provide the answers for you. So, XSLWeb, what is it? It is a web server. So, before we start talking about what XSLWeb does, let's talk a bit about what a web server does. A web server is a computer program that takes some lines. In this case, we see some lines that ask for the demo jam page of XMLPrague. These lines are called headers. And if you look at them together, maybe some extra data with them, you call them a request. And the request is sent into some machinery, which is the web server. And the web server performs some transformation. And in the end, you get the result. The demo jam page, you all know it. It's very nice jam, I like it, it's sweet. It could be anything, it need not just be an HTML page, it can also be XML or JSON or a song, XSLT song for instance, or Angel Bracket Dance. No, that wouldn't be possible. So it can be anything, but I said a web server does a transformation, and that's essential. I said that on purpose. Because if you look at it that way, a web server, if the request were an XML document, a web server could just be, well, for instance, XSLT. And that's the main idea behind XSLWeb. To have XML techniques used to render something to the endpoint, to the client. XML techniques, you see them here. XProc and XMLPrague are the most obvious choices. Then we had maybe Apache Cocoon. You have Servlex, many other options. You just fill in the blanks. I'll fill in the blank for you. It's XSLWeb. So if you look at this picture, you might think that XSLWeb, well, is a transformation of a request into a web page, but that's in fact a bit of a simplification. XSLWeb is in fact a 2-stage rocket, and it doesn't create this page. Instead, it creates a pipeline dynamically. So this request is transformed into, well, a pipeline, and which pipeline is dependent on what is in the request. Different page asked for, different pipeline. And the pipeline is dependent on the information in the XML document, the request document. It may be the page name, but it may also be something in the parameters or in the session, maybe even a cookie if you like cookies. Could be anything. So this is what XSLWeb does. It takes a request, feeds it into the machinery, and creates a pipeline. And then it takes the same request and feeds it into the pipeline. And the pipeline will feed you with a jar of XML jam. So what is a pipeline? I'll talk about that later, but a pipeline is essentially just an XML document with elements that are named pipeline, and they have sub-elements that are the steps of the pipeline, much like in XProc. So let's look at this a bit more in detail. This diagram, you have to read it like the clock. You have to start at 6 o'clock, so you go down and up and then back again. The first stage is that the client sends a request. These are the lines that I showed you in the beginning. And then it transforms those lines into an XML representation. This is the XML request that I showed before. And then it goes to something which is called the request dispatcher. A request dispatcher is a style sheet. It's very simple. If you know XSLT and who doesn't, that's all you have to know, really. When I prepared this talk in my hotel, and earlier, of course, it occurred to me that maybe request dispatcher is the wrong name. Maybe it should have been called pipeline generator, because that's what it really does. It generates a pipeline depending on the request. So you have your XSLT, you look in your XSLT request, you create a pipeline, and you can also consult something like this, a configuration file, the web app.xml. Well, after the pipeline has been produced, the XML document is sent into the pipeline processor, and this will do the real job using a lot, or maybe just one, XSLT style sheets, or anything other, like XQuery, or streaming, or transforming XML into PDF, things like that. You have a sequence of style sheets that are pipelined after resolver. And in the end, you get a response. The response is also an XML document, and this is serialized into, again, headers, these kind of lines that we started with. These lines plus some code or content is sent to the client, and there you are, the clock is round. So, well, this was the nice part of the presentation. Now we start the boring part. XSLWeb, yeah, it's just the Java servlet. If you don't know what that is, never mind. Internally, it uses Saxon's model, the tiny tree. And I'm told that it's very efficient. So if you worry about performance, you really need to worry about the performance of your style sheets and not about the model of XSLWeb. Nice thing of XSLWeb is that you have, well, that may be obvious now, anything in HTTP in an XML representation. Any HTTP method, get, post, put, you name it, is supported. The response is also XML, so you live in an XML plus XSLT or XQuery world. So that makes pipelining trivially easy. Other thing is that, well, like a good web server, XSLWeb allows caching so that you don't need to compute the same thing twice. You can, of course, access static content like images or JavaScript files or CSS files or whatever. And one of the nice things is that XSLWeb has a lot of extension functions that make web programming easy. And that is where XSLWeb stands out a bit from, well, environments like it was in Cocoon and it is in XProc. In XProc, if you want to do something, well, outside of your XML context, for instance, you want to query a database, or you want to send an email, or you want to do something with a zip file, well, you often end up in Cocoon or XProc creating a separate pipeline and then compute things, and then in the end you merge that pipeline with your original pipeline, and then you go on and you produce a result. But XSLWeb has extension functions for doing with things with a zip file, with email, with images, with a database. So everything is intended to make your life as an XSLT programmer easier, and you don't have to learn much about other languages. It's also good to know that XSLWeb is not just an abstract IDE, it's in extensive daily use by Dutch government organizations. For instance, if you want to know about the Dutch law with Article 461, which says trespassers will be prosecuted. I remember that line from Winnie the Pooh. There's a great chance that somewhere behind the scenes you will have XSLWeb as a web service. We are currently developing a site about a website for the treaties, the Dutch treaties that are hosted in the Netherlands. It's a treaty database, and we serve it as a front-end application by means of XSLWeb. Patent office, land registry, also places where XSLWeb is being used. Well, I was talking about the extension functions. Here they are. You can, like you do in a normal web application, manipulate a request, and most often you do the session because you want history between pages. We have XPath file functions. We implemented them themselves, but they obey by the specification. You need them for the more mundane tasks in this world. So, for instance, you want to move a file or delete it or put it somewhere else. We also have the HTTP library by Florent Georges for doing HTTP requests. So you can use REST services, SOAP services, and things like that. You can, if you have nothing else, you can spawn a command line. You can send email. Well, I already told you. So let's have a look at the central part of XSLWeb, which is the request dispatcher. The thing what I said, maybe we should have called it the pipeline generator. I'll take a moment to look at it. It's just a small piece of XSLT. It matches the request document, which has a root element request. It has a child element path, and the path was specified in the browser. You can see that here, hello world.html. So if that is a match, it generates a pipeline element. The pipeline element has a child transformer. The transformer refers to an XSLT style sheet, and the XSLT style sheet is doing the real job. How would you do that? Well, it can simply create a header line with hello world, or it could use the document function to retrieve an XML document containing the word hello world, or it could do, it could contact the hello world server and get content from there. It's up to the style sheet. So that's just your art, your XSLT art. Only thing that you have to know is how to write a request dispatcher style sheet. Now let's make it a bit more complicated. Let's add a parameter that adds language sensitivity to it. So if we have a request with lang is CZ, Czech, we would like to have the result in Czech. So that's how that works. Take a moment to look at it. You see that there is a section of parameters in the style sheet, in the request, and inside the parameters is a parameter, and the parameter has an attribute name, and the value of the name should be lang, and it can have more than one value, theoretically. In our case, we don't want that, we just want one value, so just to make sure we don't get, wrong results, we just take the first value of the set of values, which will be normally the only one, and then we create more or less the same pipeline as we did before. Only thing is that the path to the XSL is now computed by means of a concatenation with this language variable. So don't try this at home, of course, because you really want a constraint about the parameter. Now, it could be anything, so it could end up in something very wrong, but this is just a demo, and it will not leave this room, I hope. So forgive me. Now we make it somewhat more complex. So I was glad that it fitted on this page. Suppose that we want to render a document either in HTML or in PDF or as EPUB. It could be the proceedings of this conference. So we retrieve a parameter with the name of format, the same way as we did with the language. And then we create a first step of the pipeline that retrieves the XML. Which XML? Well, you don't say that here. The style sheet can inspect the request and determine what kind of, which XML file or document or what, or from what place, whatever, it should retrieve. So that's left as an exercise somewhere else. And then the next step is conditionally, if the format is HTML and you are very quickly ready, you just run it through a style sheet that renders XML to HTML. If the format is PDF, you have somewhat more work to do because you have to create XSLFO, in this case, in this example, and then you run it through the FOB serializer, which, by the way, should be configured if you don't want the defaults in the web app.xml. It's more or less like the fob.xconf, but then in web app.xml. Personally, I find configuring FOB a dark magic because, yeah, it offers struggles. Oh, well. Well, when the format is EPUB, you have, well, more or less the same pattern, but instead of XSLFO, you create an XML representation of a zip file, and then finally, you use the zip serializer to make that a real zip file, and then you send it because an EPUB file really is a zip file with a different extension. So, in fact, that's all there is to know about XSLWeb. So, let's spend a bit more, some words about what is a pipeline. A pipeline can be a transformer, you already saw them, but it also can be XQuery, and it can be a streaming transformer. Maybe that's a bit obsolete now that we have streaming transformations in XSLT, but these are the options you have. And streaming transformations are extremely useful if you have a very large document and you don't want to load that entirely in core. So you can, maybe you can use streaming to select just the portion from it that you really need, and that will create a smaller memory footprint. So these are the transformer steps. Unlike Cocoon, we don't have a generator step. Cocoon, if you know Cocoon had generators that generated the initial XML. Our initial XML is always a request. So we don't have a generator, we just have transformers. And we have validators, because you want to make sure, well, sometimes you want to make sure that everything is all right. So you can feed at any moment in your pipeline the result, the XML as it is at that time, through a schema validator or a schematron validator. And finally, you can serialize it, well, for instance, as JSON. This one is also obsolete because now in XSLT we have these nice XML to JSON facilities. By the way, it occurs to me that in our XML world we often offer facilities to do something with JSON, but I wonder if in the JSON world there are facilities to do something with XML. Maybe we're just a bit too friendly, or even on this day, Valentine's Day, love comes only from one side, I don't know. Well, anyway. Other serializers, we saw them already, the zip and the FOB serializer, and the resource serializer for, well, just rendering an image or a text file like JavaScript or CSS. Then there are some other goodies. If you are behind the firewall with your server, you can use proxying. You can, of course, pass parameters to your style sheet. And the nicest thing is the first bullet. You can have a URL that doesn't start with something like HTTP or HTTPS, but you can have a URL that starts with XSLWeb. And if you put an a URL like that in your doc or document function, XSLWeb will be called recursively, and it will create another pipeline for you, and you will get a result at a place where you call the doc function, and you can do with it whatever you like. Just use copy off or apply templates. Well, it's up to you. This is, well, a rather strong feature, but I must say I only used it once during my 62 years of life. But, after that I removed it again because I found a simpler way to do the same thing. But it's good to have it. So now the most important question, why did we invent XSLWeb? Or why did Maarten invent XSLWeb? And maybe the important reason is given here. It was just fun to do. And as for me, using it is fun. But okay, there were other reasons. Let me say that it's not always needed to have just one solution for the same problem. It's good for the world to try different things. Another thing is that Maarten, wanted XSLWeb to be very easy to learn, and I think, well, you could use it now after this kind of training. It's really that simple. You can do things at the moment you want, I already told you. Yeah, so more of the same on this diagram. And this is one of my holidays. My idea is XProc is very powerful. It's like a car, but sometimes, well, you can do with a bike. I don't have a car. So there are two use cases that distinguish between when I use XProc, because I do like XProc and I use it a lot, but I use XProc in the case of when I have migrations of a large collection of documents with complex operations and multiple inputs, multiple outputs. Time doesn't really matter that much like in a web environment. So XProc in my world is used usually for batch processing. XSLWeb, on the other hand, is, well, for straightforward pipelines, just for the web, should be quick, should be easy. Well, that's it. So XSL, is that XQuery there? It should be XProc. That's the autocorrect, I think, or it's my mistake. XSLT and XProc, they overlap sometimes. And, well, of course, it should be simple, should be feasible, and maybe we'll do it to integrate XSLWeb and XProc. Because if we generate a pipeline in XSLWeb terms, why couldn't we just generate an XProc pipeline and have XProc execute it? Or we could have an XProc transformation step in XSLWeb, or we could have an extension step in XProc that calls XSLWeb. But as for me, that's why I like it so much, is the bottom line that makes life really a feast. You have XSLWeb on your server side, backend, and you have Stacks.js, which I like very much, in the front end. So, yeah, it's a good jar of jam for me. That's it. Any questions?
We have time for one or two questions.
Hello, my name is Tudor. I would like to ask if you rely on the server for security, and if you have to store any sort of credentials for your pipelines, how would you secure them?
I'm not sure if I can answer that question. Do you have an idea, Maarten, security? It's...
Regarding security, we rely on Tomcat, for instance, and we only support basic authentication within XSLWeb itself. Okay. But mostly we rely on the application server in which XSLWeb is running. So yeah, you can use all the features of your server for the security part of the web application.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Maarten, because I could have thought of that myself. I was intimidated. There's not a question over there.
Thanks for the talk. This reminds me how I use REST-XQ implementation by BaseX. I also use XSLT transformations in this setup. How would you compare these two technologies? I think you focus more on pipelines.
Yeah, well, I haven't used that, but we have some slides about that. Is it here? Yeah, here it is. Well, yeah, we could have done that. But we didn't want to tie ourselves to one specific platform. And we have a lot of sources where our XML is coming from, so we have to be flexible. So that was the reason for us to define something ourselves, to be very flexible in wherever content came from. And well, that's why XSLWeb was created, but you certainly have a point that this is very serious. It could have been also an approach, yeah.
So we use XSLWeb as a front end for a lot of databases. And we don't want to be tied to one particular database, especially not BaseX or Exist. We use that, but not in production. We use Solar and we use MarkLogic and we use other databases. And we want to use XSLWeb as a front end for those systems. So we don't want to be tied to one solution.
Okay, thanks. Database. Thanks for the missing slide.
Again. Okay.
Regarding multi-threading and threads processes, are these pipelines compatible, or have you tried to use them with Docker or Kubernetes?
I don't know if we tried them, but I don't see any obstacles.
So instead of working with XProc, you could actually build them in containers and run them separately, yes, independent of each other?
Yes, it's no problem. It's just a Java web application. So if you can run Tomcat, for instance, in a Docker container, you can run XSLWeb in a container. There's no problem. Yeah. It's just a Java servlet web application.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well...
thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to what you have done with it.
Yes, you can ask more questions directly to the speakers. Thank you very much.